She was holding a check for $500,000, enough money to change her life, pay off all her debts, and finally achieve security. But Claire tore up the check right in front of billionaire Alexander Grayson, the same man who destroyed her career months earlier. Because some principles are priceless, and she wouldn't sell her silence for any amount. But then Alexander made a different request, not for money, but for a chance to save his daughter's life using the very medical technology Claire fought to make accessible to everyone. Now torn between her painful past and the possibility of truly making a difference, Claire must decide if she can trust the man who betrayed her, if she can work side by side with her biggest enemy, and if she is ready to discover that sometimes the perfect revenge isn't destroying the one who hurt you, but proving you were right all along. This is the story of how she refused the millionaire's money, but accepted the request that changed not only her life, but the lives of millions around the world. The story begins with Claire Morrison, 29 years old, standing in the luxurious lobby of the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Boston, holding a white envelope containing a check for $500,000. Her hands are trembling slightly, not from excitement, but from something much more complex, a mix of indignation, wounded pride, and an unwavering determination that defines who she is as a person. Around her, the lobby is filled with executives in expensive suits, wealthy tourists, and immaculate staff, but she barely notices because all her attention is focused on the man seated in the leather armchair in front of her. Alexander Grayson, 52, CEO of Grayson Industries, a technology empire valued in billions of dollars. With his silver temples, perfectly tailored Armani suit, and that expression of casual confidence that comes from someone who has never truly been denied anything in life. He waits patiently for her to accept the money, because in his experience, everyone has a price. Everyone eventually accepts the right offer. But what Alexander doesn't yet understand is that Claire is not like the other people he is used to dealing with. She looks at the check one more time, seeing those zeros that represent more money than she has earned in the last 5 years combined, money that could pay off all her student loans, make a down payment on a decent apartment, replace the 2007 Honda Civic that is always breaking down, and still leave some for emergency savings. She imagines what it would be like to have that financial security. Not waking up at 3 a.m. with anxiety about bills, not having to choose between going to the dentist or paying the rent, not feeling that constant tightness in her chest that comes from living perpetually on the edge of the financial precipice. But then she remembers why he is offering this money, and the fantasy instantly evaporates. 6 months ago, Claire was working as a lead software engineer in the research and development division of Grayson Industries, a job she loved, where she was developing a revolutionary machine learning algorithm for early medical diagnosis, something that could genuinely save lives by detecting cancer and other diseases years before conventional methods could. She poured her heart and soul into that project, working 80 hours a week, sacrificing her social life, relationships, even her health, because she believed she was doing something important, something that mattered. But then she discovered by accident that Grayson Industries planned to sell her technology exclusively to elite private hospitals, making it accessible only to the rich, while most of the people who truly needed it would never have access. When Claire confronted Alexander about it, proposing that they make the technology available through partnerships with public health systems, he refused, saying the company had a fiduciary obligation to shareholders to maximize profits, not to do charity. Claire countered that it wasn't charity, it was social responsibility, that they had the capacity to save millions of lives, but were choosing to save only those who could pay. The discussion escalated. Claire threatened to leak information about the project to the press, to expose how the company was deliberately limiting access to life-saving technology. Alexander, in retaliation, fired her under fabricated claims of professional misconduct, and using his lawyers and connections, he ensured she was blacklisted in the Boston tech industry. No major company would hire her because they all feared repercussions from crossing Alexander Grayson. In the 6 months since then, Claire has been surviving by doing freelance work, small projects that pay a fraction of what she used to earn, struggling to pay the rent for her tiny studio apartment in Allston, selling her belongings one by one on Craigslist, and sometimes skipping meals to save money. But she never regretted her decision. She never wished she had stayed quiet, because some things are more important than personal comfort. Some battles must be fought even when you know you will lose. And now, Alexander has called her to this meeting, offering $500,000 in exchange for her silence, a non-disclosure agreement that would legally prevent her from talking about the project, about the company's decisions, about anything that could damage Grayson Industries' reputation. He says with that smooth, calculated voice that this is generous, considering she no longer has any leverage, any power, that she should be grateful for the opportunity to move forward with her life, financially secure. Claire looks at him, really looks at that face that is probably considered distinguished, but which she now sees only as the personification of everything wrong with corporate capitalism. The idea that profit is more important than lives, that wealth entitles one to control narratives, to suppress truths, and she tears the check right in half, then tears the pieces again, and throws everything onto the coffee table between them. The expression on Alexander's face is almost comical, because clearly no one has ever done this to him before. Claire says, with a voice that sounds firmer than she feels, that he can take his money and his NDA, and that she will never stop talking about what Grayson Industries is doing. She will never stop fighting to make that technology accessible to those who truly need it. She tells him he may have taken her job and ruined her career, but he cannot buy her integrity. He cannot buy her silence, no matter how many zeros he adds to the check. She turns and starts to walk out of the lobby, feeling everyone's eyes on her, feeling her legs trembling but holding her head high. Because if she is going to be poor and unemployed, at least she will be poor and unemployed with her dignity intact. But before she reaches the door, Alexander calls her name, and when she turns, expecting threats or anger, she sees something completely unexpected on his face. Genuine respect, perhaps even admiration. He says that no one has ever refused his money before, that she is either the most stupid person he has ever met or the most principled, and that he has a different proposal. Not money, but something she might find more valuable. Before we continue and discover what this mysterious request is that will completely change Claire's life, we want to hear from you who are following us now. Leave a comment below, telling us where you are watching from. We want to get to know every person who is part of this incredible community, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, this is the perfect time, because this story has twists you won't want to miss. And in the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. We want to know your honest opinion about every moment of this journey. Now let's find out what Alexander is about to propose. Claire stops at the hotel door, her instinct screaming at her to keep walking. Not to give Alexander the satisfaction of her curiosity, but something in his voice, something different from the corporate, controlled tone she is used to, makes her hesitate. She turns slowly, walking back to where he is still seated in that leather armchair. But now he has stood up, and there is a vulnerability in his posture that she has never seen before, as if the mask of the impenetrable CEO has developed a crack. Alexander gestures for her to sit, and this time it is not an order or an expectation, but a genuine request. Claire, against her better judgment, sits in the opposite armchair, maintaining her defensive posture, arms crossed, expression guarded, because she doesn't trust him at all but is too curious to leave without hearing him out. Alexander sighs deeply, running a hand through his graying hair in a gesture that seems surprisingly human, and he begins to speak, not with the usual corporate confidence, but with a hesitation that suggests he is about to share something he doesn't share easily. He explains that he has a daughter, Sophia, 23 years old, recently graduated from Stanford with a brilliant future ahead of her. Except that 6 months ago, Sophia was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive type of lymphoma. The best oncologists in Boston, Mass General, Dana-Farber, all told him the same thing. The cancer was detected too late, that if they had found it months earlier, she would have an 80% chance of full recovery. But now, detected at stage 3, her chances have dropped to less than 40%. Claire feels her stomach tighten because she can see where this is going, and suddenly she understands many things about Alexander's motivation that didn't make sense before. He continues, saying that Sophia is everything to him, that after his divorce 10 years ago, she was the only constant in his life, the only person who saw him not as the billionaire CEO, but just as her father, and the idea of losing her is literally unbearable, more than he can process. And then he says the part Claire didn't expect, that he has been following her work for the past 6 months, that he knows she continues to develop the algorithm in her spare time, using borrowed equipment and open-source software because she is too obsessed to stop just because she was fired, and that her preliminary tests are showing even better results than the corporate version because she is focused on real efficacy instead of marketability. Alexander pauses, looking directly into Claire's eyes with an intensity that is almost physical, and he says that he wants her to finish the algorithm, not for Grayson Industries, but as an independent project, and that he will fund everything personally, outside the company. He will give her access to labs, equipment, the best data scientist money can buy, and when it is ready, he will help her make it open source, free for any hospital, clinic, or doctor to use, regardless of ability to pay. Exactly what Claire always wanted. Claire is completely stunned because this is literally her dream, the opportunity to do the work she loves, the way she always believed it should be done, without compromising her principles. But then suspicion sets in, because nothing in life is free, especially coming from someone like Alexander Grayson. And she asks, "What's the catch? What is your real motivation?" Alexander responds with brutal honesty that yes, there is personal motivation. He hopes the technology will be ready in time to make a difference for Sophia, that he is essentially asking Claire to save his daughter's life. But he says that even if it's not ready in time, even if Sophia doesn't survive, he will still honor the agreement to make the technology open source, because he finally understands what Claire tried to explain months ago, that his daughter is no more important than any other daughter or son or father or mother who dies because they don't have access to early detection, that this is not just Sophia's fight. It is the fight of millions of people, and that he was terribly, cynically wrong, to prioritize profit margins over human lives. Claire searches for signs of manipulation, for that calculated corporate speak she knows so well, but all she sees is a desperate father and a man confronting the moral bankruptcy of many of his past decisions. And she asks, "Why me? Why not hire an entire team of top scientists?" Alexander replies that he could do that, and in fact, he is already doing that. He has oncologists working on Sophia's case, but that Claire's algorithm specifically is the most promising he has seen, that her approach is different, more intuitive, more focused on subtle patterns that other technologies miss. And more importantly, he needs someone who genuinely cares, not just about publishing papers or winning awards, but about the real impact, about the lives that will be saved. He says Claire has already proven that she cares more than anyone he has ever met, that she literally sacrificed her career and financial security for principle, and that if anyone can make this work, it's her. And then comes the part that truly catches Claire off guard. Alexander says she will have complete creative control, that all decisions about the development and distribution of the technology will be hers, that he is merely the funder, and that everything will be legally documented through an independent foundation, where Claire will be the chief scientist with final authority on how the technology is used. Claire wants to believe him. She desperately wants to, because this is the opportunity she dreamed of. But she is also terrified. What if it's a trap? What if she invests everything in this, and Alexander somehow betrays her again? And what if she can't save Sophia and then has to carry that guilt for the rest of her life? She expresses these concerns, and Alexander doesn't try to minimize them. He simply says he understands that she has no reason to trust him, that he broke that trust and will have to rebuild it through actions, not words, and that as for the burden of potentially not saving Sophia, he is already carrying that. And it is not Claire's responsibility but his own, for not having supported her work from the beginning when it could have made a difference. There is something in the way he says this, in the absence of manipulation or pressure, that makes Claire pause and truly consider, and she thinks of all the months struggling to survive, thinking her work would never be finished, that dream of life-saving technology accessible to all was dead. And now, someone is offering not just to revive it, but to give her the resources to do it right, the way it always should have been done. And she thinks of Sophia, a 23-year-old whom Claire has never met, but who represents all the people who die unnecessarily because early detection is not available or not accessible. And Claire realizes that this is not really a choice, because if she refuses out of pride or fear, she will be doing exactly what she accused Alexander of doing, prioritizing her own feelings over lives that could be saved. So she takes a deep breath and says yes, but with conditions. That everything be legally documented before starting, that she wants total transparency in all finances, that any patent be registered under the foundation, not under Alexander's or her name, and that no matter what happens to Sophia, the technology will be open source, with no exceptions. Alexander agrees to everything immediately and extends his hand. And when Claire shakes it, she feels that she has just crossed a threshold, that her life will never be the same, and she has no idea how right that intuition truly is. 2 weeks later, Claire finds herself in a state-of-the-art research facility in Cambridge, a discreet glass and steel building that from the outside looks like just another tech office, but inside contains some of the most advanced medical imaging and data processing equipment on the East Coast. Alexander has been true to his word. He established the Morrison Grayson Foundation, named equally for her and for Sophia, hired the best nonprofit lawyers to ensure everything is legal and binding, and gave Claire access to resources she could only have dreamed of when she worked at Grayson Industries. The team he assembled is impressive. There is Dr. James Chen, an oncologist from Yale, with a specialization in early detection. Priya Sharma, a data scientist who worked at Google AI before deciding she wanted to apply machine learning to healthcare. And Marcus Johnson, a biostatistician whose papers on pattern recognition Claire studied in grad school. And technically, there is Claire, as chief scientist, coordinating everything. In the first few days, there is a palpable strangeness, because everyone knows the story. They know about the confrontation between Claire and Alexander, about the fact that his daughter is dying, and that there is an invisible but relentless clock ticking over the entire project. Claire feels the weight of that expectation as a physical pressure on her chest, because this is not just abstract research. These are real stakes, a real life hanging in the balance. Initially, she wonders if she can work under this pressure, but then something interesting happens. She meets Sophia. Not formally. Alexander hasn't mentioned anything about Claire to his daughter, not wanting to add pressure. But Claire was visiting the lab on a Saturday because she practically lives there now, when a young woman appears at the door, clearly weak from chemo, hair starting to grow back in patches. Claire recognizes her from the photos in Alexander's office. Sophia says she was curious about the place her father is so secretive about, that he's spending less time at the hospital with her and more time at this lab. And she says this without bitterness, just with curiosity and perhaps a little relief, because she is tired of being the center of all attention, of being treated as if she will break at any moment. Claire doesn't know what to say, because how do you talk to someone who might be dying, and whose father is paying you to save her? But Sophia makes everything easy. She asks about the work, genuinely interested, and it turns out she majored in biomedical engineering, so she understands the technical concepts. They end up talking for 3 hours about algorithms and pattern recognition and the shared frustration of how slow medical technology is to reach people who truly need it. Sophia mentions casually that when she was diagnosed, she researched obsessively and found references to Claire's work, that she had actually spoken to her father about that Grayson Industries project months before the diagnosis, saying it looked revolutionary, and that they should make it widely available. And she laughs bitterly, saying the irony is not lost on her. If her father had listened to both her and Claire months earlier, maybe the outcome would be different. Claire feels her heart squeeze because she sees in this young woman not a privileged heiress or an abstract symbol, but a real person, intelligent, passionate, full of potential, who is being robbed of decades of life because of detection that came months too late. Something shifts in that moment. Claire has always cared about the project, always seen it as important, but now it is personal in a different way. When she returns to work, there is a new intensity, a focus that borders on obsession. She works 18 hours a day, refining the algorithm, testing it on historical datasets, looking for those subtle patterns that appear months or even years before tumors become detectable by conventional methods. And the team catches that energy too. Everyone working insane hours, fueled by takeout coffee, and the knowledge that they are literally racing against time. Alexander appears at the lab periodically, always quiet, always staying out of the way, but Claire notices how he looks at the monitors, as if he could will the data into revelation. And one night, when it's just her and him in the lab at 2 a.m, he finally talks about things beyond research updates. He tells her how Sophia has always been independent, even as a child, refusing help, insisting on doing everything herself, like Claire in a way, and how watching the cancer take that independence, seeing her need help for basic things, is destroying him in ways that financial losses or business failures never did. And he says something Claire will never forget, that you can make all the money in the world, build empires, buy anything, but in the end, none of it matters when you're sitting in a hospital room watching your child suffer, and you are completely powerless. Claire understands then that she was not just wrong about Alexander being a one-dimensional villain. He is complicated, like every human being, capable of tremendous callousness in business but also of profound love, capable of prioritizing profit, but also of recognizing when he was wrong and changing. And that realization makes her uncomfortable, because it is easier to work for someone you simply hate than for someone you are starting to see as fundamentally human, with flaws and virtues all mixed together. The months pass. Fall turns into winter. Boston is covered in snow, and the algorithm slowly, agonizingly progresses. There are breakthroughs and setbacks, data sets that look promising but don't replicate, patterns that appear but disappear. There are nights where Claire wants to give up, convinced they are chasing something impossible, and others where she sees glimpses of something revolutionary, something that really could change everything. And through it all, Sophia is getting worse. The cancer is proving resistant to conventional treatments. Doctors are starting to talk about palliative care, about making her comfortable. Claire feels an impotent rage because they are so close. She can feel the algorithm is almost there, but almost is not enough. Not when every day matters. And then, on a February night at 3 a.m, when everyone else has gone home and it's just Claire alone with the monitors and code, something clicks. A pattern she has been looking for months finally reveals itself, so obvious in retrospect that she wants to scream. And she runs the algorithm again and again on different datasets, and the accuracy is astonishing. 92% accuracy in detecting early-stage cancers 6 to 8 months before conventional methods. Better than even the most optimistic results she expected. She immediately calls Alexander. It is 4 a.m, but he answers on the first ring, because he probably wasn't sleeping anyway. And she says the words he has been waiting for months. We did it. There is a silence on the other end, and then she hears something that breaks her heart. The sound of a man who hasn't cried in decades finally breaking down. The next 48 hours are a frantic blur of activity. Alexander mobilizes resources with a speed that only billions of dollars can buy. He brings in oncologists from Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, MD Anderson, the best cancer specialists in the country, to review the algorithm. Claire is initially annoyed by the implication that her work needs validation, but then realizes this is not about doubt. It's about being absolutely sure before using it on Sophia. Because if the algorithm is wrong, if it gives false hope, the devastation would be unbearable. The specialists spend 2 full days examining the code, reviewing the datasets, and testing the algorithm on historical cases, and the consensus is unanimous. This is genuinely revolutionary, not just incrementally better, but a fundamental leap forward in early detection capability. Dr. Rachel Torres, an oncologist from MD Anderson with 30 years of experience, says with tears in her eyes that if this technology had existed 10 years ago, she could have saved hundreds of her patients who died of cancers detected late stage. There is a surreal moment where Claire is sitting in a conference room surrounded by some of the best medical minds in the country, all looking at her with something like awe, and she realizes she has changed the game. That the work she started in a tiny apartment with borrowed equipment truly will save countless lives. But there is no time for celebration, because Sophia is getting worse fast. Her doctors have given her weeks, maybe a month at most. Claire and the team work 20 hours a day, adapting the algorithm specifically for Sophia's type of cancer, refining the parameters to identify not just early detection, but also potential treatments that might be more effective based on the specific patterns of how her tumor is developing. It's Priya who makes the critical discovery. She's running the algorithm with Sophia's data and notices something strange, a pattern that shouldn't be there, given the advanced stage of the cancer. When she looks deeper, she realizes it's not one tumor, it's 2 tumors. One that the oncologist identified and treated, and another much smaller one hiding behind the first. completely missed by the conventional scan. This second tumor is the reason the treatments weren't working. They were attacking the wrong target while the real culprit continued growing. When they bring this information to Sophia's oncologists, there is initial skepticism. Because how could an algorithm see something that multiple CT scans and MRIs missed? But Dr. Torres insists on doing a specialized scan focused specifically where the algorithm indicates, and when the results come back, there is stunned silence, because it's there, exactly where Claire said it would be. A small but aggressive tumor that was invisible in the previous scans, because it was obscured by the larger mass. Suddenly, everything changes. Because this tumor, though aggressive, is still relatively small, and there are specific treatments for this exact type, much more effective than the one Sophia was receiving. Dr. Torres immediately develops a new treatment plan, targeted radiation, combined with a newer immunotherapy drug that has shown promising results for exactly this cancer type. For the first time in months, there is genuine hope. Not a guarantee, because cancer never offers guarantees, but a real fighting chance. Claire is at the hospital when they tell Sophia and Alexander is holding his daughter's hand. When Dr. Torres explains about the second tumor and the new treatment plan, Sophia looks directly at Claire and says, "You saved me, didn't you?" And Claire wants to protest that it's too early to know, that there's a long road ahead. But Sophia cuts her off, saying it doesn't matter the outcome. This gave her something she hadn't had in months: hope and time, and that's all she was asking for. Alexander says nothing. He just looks at Claire with an expression she can't quite decipher. Gratitude, yes, but also something more, something like deep respect or even reverence. In the following days, while Sophia begins the new treatment protocol, Claire and the team return their focus to the bigger picture, because the algorithm isn't just about one person. It's about making this available to everyone. Alexander has already started the process of making the technology open source, working with tech lawyers to ensure it is released under a license that allows any hospital or clinic to use it free, but prevents companies from taking it and commercializing it without permission. There is immense pushback from the Grayson Industries board of directors, who are furious that Alexander is essentially giving away billions of dollars in potential revenue. There are even threats of a lawsuit, alleging that since the initial research started while Claire was employed by the company, they have proprietary rights over any developments. Alexander handles this the only way possible. He publicly announces his intention to make the technology open source, giving interviews to the New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal, explaining exactly why life-saving medical technology should not be restricted by profit motive. The public response is overwhelmingly positive. Suddenly, Alexander, who spent decades being viewed as a typical ruthless CEO, is being hailed as a philanthropist and visionary. And the Grayson Industries board, backed into a corner by public opinion, has no choice but to accept. There is a delicious irony in this, that Alexander is getting praised for doing exactly what Claire told him he should do a year ago, when he fired her for suggesting it. When Claire points this out to him during a late-night work session, he laughs genuinely for the first time she has heard, and admits that she was completely right, that he was arrogant and short-sighted, and that it took almost losing his daughter to understand what should have been obvious from the start, that some things are infinitely more important than profit margins. And then he says something that completely surprises Claire. He says he wants her to take over as CEO of the Morrison Grayson Foundation when the algorithm is publicly released, that she should be the face of this technology, the person guiding how it is implemented and used. Claire immediately protests, saying she is a scientist, not a CEO, that she knows nothing about running an organization. But Alexander argues that precisely because she is a scientist, because she understands the technology intimately, and because she demonstrated unwavering integrity even when it cost her everything, that is exactly why she is perfect for the role. Claire is terrified by the prospect, but also intrigued, because this would be an opportunity to ensure that the technology is really used as it should be, not just in theory, but in practice, to fight to make it accessible to community hospitals, to free clinics, to developing countries where early detection could make an even bigger impact than in the US. And she realizes that accepting this role would be completing a journey that began with that confrontation at the Mandarin Oriental, transforming from someone who refused money out of principle to someone who has real power to change systems, to make those principles a reality on a massive scale. And she says yes, the next 6 months are a tornado of activity. The Morrison Grayson Foundation officially launches with Claire as CEO, and the announcement generates headlines worldwide because the story is compelling, irresistible to the media narrative. A young woman who sacrificed her career for principle is later given the chance to develop revolutionary technology that is now being released free to the world. Claire suddenly finds herself thrust into a spotlight that she absolutely detests. There are interview requests from CNN, NPR, and the BBC, invitations to speak at TED conferences, medical conferences, and tech conferences. Initially, she wants to refuse everything because she is a scientist, not a public figure. But Alexander and Priya both convince her that part of the job is advocacy. It is using the platform to educate, to pressure other companies to consider similar approaches. Claire then finds herself doing things completely outside her comfort zone, standing on stages in front of hundreds of people, explaining the algorithm, fielding questions from journalists, and learning to navigate the complicated world of public relations and corporate partnership. It is exhausting, not just physically but emotionally, because she still has imposter syndrome, still feels like she is just an engineer who got lucky, not someone who deserves to be in the same conversation as medical pioneers and tech visionaries. But there are positive developments too. Hospitals start implementing the algorithm. First major medical centers like Mass General and Johns Hopkins, but then smaller regional hospitals, community clinics, and even mobile health units that serve rural areas. The results start coming in. Stories of cancers detected impossibly early, of treatments begun when still highly treatable, of lives definitively saved because the algorithm caught something that conventional methods would have missed for months or years. Every story, every email from a grateful patient or relieved family member reinforces to Claire that everything she went through, the financial struggle, the career sacrifice, the endless work hours, was worth it, because this is making a real, tangible difference. Sophia is among the success stories. The new treatment protocol based on what the algorithm discovered worked better than anyone hoped. Within 4 months, her scans are showing dramatic improvement. The second tumor virtually disappeared, and the primary tumor significantly shrunk. After 8 months, Dr. Torres uses the word that no one dared to hope for: remission. Sophia is in remission, and the celebration is subdued because everyone knows that remission does not mean cured, that there is always a chance of recurrence. But it is a massive victory nonetheless. Sophia, who went from being given weeks to live to making plans for graduate school, attributes everything to Claire, and the two have developed a genuine friendship, bonding over the shared experience of almost losing everything and choosing to fight instead of accepting defeat. Sophia frequently visits the foundation office, helping with outreach efforts, speaking in patient advocacy groups, and sharing her story to give hope to others. Claire marvels at how this young woman who faced death with such grace is now channeling that experience into helping others. There are moments of levity too, such as when Marcus, the biostatistician, finally asks Priya out after months of obvious mutual attraction, and the whole office bets on how long until the engagement, or when Dr. Chen accidentally spills coffee all over an important presentation minutes before a meeting with potential donors, and everyone scrambles to reprint everything while he stands there mortified, but also laughing, because sometimes you have to laugh at the absurdity of it all. But there are challenges too. Some massive pharmaceutical companies are not happy about the algorithm being open source, because it threatens their business model. If cancers are detected earlier with free technology, there is less need for their expensive late-stage treatment drug. They begin a sophisticated campaign of FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, questioning the accuracy of the algorithm, suggesting that without proper oversight, it could lead to dangerous misdiagnosis. Claire has to fight back, doing interviews, providing data from thousands of successful detections, and assembling an advisory board of respected oncologists who vouch for the technology. It is frustrating, because she thought that saving lives would be universally supported, but learns that there are always interests that prioritize profit over people. There will always be resistance when you threaten established power structure. More personally, Claire finds herself struggling with work-life balance. She is pouring everything into the foundation, working 80-hour weeks, and there is no time for anything else. No relationships, no hobbies, barely time to sleep. Her friends from grad school, whom she barely kept in contact with anyway, start commenting that she seems different, more distant, more intense, as if carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. And she is, because every day she delays expanding the program to developing countries is another day that people die of cancers that could have been detected. And this awareness is simultaneously motivating and crushing. There is a growing tension with some foundation board members, particularly some of the major donors Alexander brought in to provide funding. Some of them are old-school businessmen who agreed to support the foundation because of the good publicity, but fundamentally do not understand or agree with the open-source approach, and they begin pushing to monetize the technology, even modestly, arguing that a sustainable funding model is necessary for long-term viability. Claire opposes this vehemently, arguing that beginning to charge anything, even a small amount, will immediately create disparities, will mean that the poorest countries and poorest communities won't have access, which is literally the opposite of the entire point. The debates get heated, with Claire occasionally losing her temper, reminding board members that this is not about building a sustainable business. It is about saving the maximum number of lives possible. And some board members start grumbling that Claire is too idealistic, too inflexible, that she needs to be more pragmatic. There are whispers that maybe she is not the right person for the CEO role, that maybe someone with more business experience should lead. Alexander consistently supports Claire, shooting down these suggestions, but even he occasionally suggests that maybe she could compromise in small ways, accepting some corporate partnerships with strings attached, just to secure funding. Claire feels like she is constantly fighting battles on multiple fronts, fighting to expand access, fighting to maintain integrity, and fighting to prove that she belongs in a role she never trained for. And then the thing happens that almost destroys everything. During a routine audit, a junior accountant discovers irregularities in some of the foundation expenses. When they investigate deeper, they discover that someone has been embezzling funds. Not massive amounts, but a steady trickle over months, totaling nearly $200,000. An internal investigation is launched, and suspicion initially falls on Claire, because as CEO, she had access to the accounts, she had the opportunity. And some of the board members who already wanted her gone jump on this as proof that she was never qualified for the position, that her idealism was naivety, that she couldn't be trusted. Alexander defends her, absolutely refusing to entertain the possibility of her involvement. But Claire can see the doubt even in his eyes, a tiny hesitation that cuts deeper than any, because after everything they went through, part of her thought she had earned his complete trust. The investigation expands, tearing through every transaction, every receipt, and the atmosphere in the foundation turns toxic with suspicion, everyone watching everyone else. Claire is simultaneously trying to prove her innocence while keeping the foundation running, because the work can't stop, because there are hospitals waiting to implement the algorithm, patients depending on it. The stress is unbearable. Claire isn't sleeping, is losing weight, is snapping at colleagues who are just trying to help, and there are moments where she wonders if she should just resign to remove the cloud of suspicion, but she refuses to quit because that would be admitting defeat. It would be letting whoever really did this win. And then the breakthrough comes from the most unexpected source. It's Sophia, using her biomedical engineering skills to dig through the digital records, and she discovers that the embezzlement was being done by Richard Chen, one of the original board members whom Alexander personally recruited, someone with decades of nonprofit experience and an impeccable reputation. Richard confesses when confronted, explaining that he had a gambling addiction that spiraled out of control, that he never intended for anyone to get hurt. He thought he could pay the money back before anyone noticed. Claire feels vindication, but also sadness, because Richard was someone she respected, someone she thought was an ally, and the betrayal stings even though she wasn't the direct target. Richard is immediately removed. Board members who suspected Claire offer awkward apologies, but the damage to relationships is already done. Claire realizes that no matter what she achieves, there will always be people who doubt her capabilities, who see her as an imposter, who got lucky instead of someone who earned the position through brilliance and sacrifice. In the weeks following the embezzlement scandal, Claire finds herself at a crossroads. While her name was cleared and Richard Chen is facing criminal charges, the entire experience left her questioning whether she really wants to continue as CEO, whether the constant stress, the scrutiny, the feeling of always having to prove herself is worth it. She is sitting in her office on a Sunday afternoon when no one else is there, looking at a stack of paperwork that never shrinks, thinking about how radically her life has changed in just 18 months. From unemployed engineer with a negative bank balance to CEO of a foundation that is literally changing the medical landscape, but feeling more trapped than empowered. Because this is not the work she loves. She didn't get into science to sit in board meetings, to deal with donor relations, to fight political battles. She got into it to solve problems, to write code, to discover patterns that others miss. She is so lost in thought that she doesn't hear Alexander enter until he knocks on the doorframe, and she jumps, startled. He apologizes for intruding, sits across from her desk, and there is a long silence where both just sit with the weight of everything unspoken between them. Finally, Alexander speaks, and he says he needs to apologize, that when the embezzlement was discovered, he had a moment of doubt about her, not because he thought she was capable of stealing, but because a part of him always expects the worst from people, always assumes that everyone has a price, that everyone eventually disappoints, because that was his experience in the business world for decades. And he says that doubt lasted maybe 30 seconds before he knew with absolute certainty that Claire would be the last person in the world who would do something like that. But those 30 seconds of hesitation were a betrayal of the trust she deserved, and he is genuinely sorry. Claire feels tears burning because she didn't realize how much that momentary doubt hurt until he acknowledges it. She admits that she has been questioning if she belongs in the CEO role, if maybe the board members who wanted someone more experienced were right. Alexander immediately shakes his head and says that she is exactly what the foundation needs, that experience without integrity is worthless, while integrity with a willingness to learn is invaluable. But then he says something that surprises her. He says that if she really isn't happy in the role, he won't fight her. If she wants to go back to being a pure scientist, to let someone else handle the administrative side, he will support that. Because forcing her to stay in a position that makes her miserable would be repeating the same mistake that cost him almost everything before. Claire is shocked because she expected a fight, expected him to convince her that she has to stay, but instead, he is giving her permission to choose, to decide what she really wants. And this freedom to choose paradoxically makes the decision harder, because now it's not about obligation or duty. It's about what she genuinely wants for her life. She takes the weekend to think, really think, not about what she should want, but what she actually wants. And she thinks about the moments that brought her genuine joy in the last few months, and realizes that it wasn't the board meetings or the donor dinner. It was the moments in the lab, troubleshooting the algorithm with Priya. It was visiting hospitals and seeing the technology being implemented. It was talking with patients who were helped. And she realizes that what she really wants is a hybrid role. She wants to be involved in the strategic direction of the foundation, but also wants hands-on research time, wants to continue developing the technology, not just rest on past achievements, but keep pushing boundaries. Monday morning, she proposes this to the board, a structure where she remains as CSO, Chief Scientific Officer, with significant input on the foundation's direction. But they hire an experienced nonprofit CEO to handle day-to-day operations, fundraising, and board relations. There is resistance from some board members who see this as her admitting failure, as validation of their doubt. But Alexander backs her completely. And the majority of the board agrees that having Claire focused on what she does best, developing technology, makes more sense than forcing her into a role that drains her. The decision takes a weight off Claire's shoulders that she didn't fully realize she was carrying. The new CEO they hire is a woman named Patricia Williams, who has 30 years in nonprofit management, but who genuinely believes in the mission, who isn't just checking a box for career advancement. Patricia and Claire develop a good working relationship, Patricia handling the aspects that Claire dreads while Claire gets to dive back into research. And she starts working on the next generation of the algorithm, expanding beyond just cancer detection to other diseases, to predicting treatment responses, to personalizing medicine in ways never before possible. Sophia, now fully in remission, decides to join the foundation too, initially as a patient advocate, but increasingly taking on a larger role, and she turns out to be a natural at donor relations, at public speaking, in ways that Claire never will be. And watching Sophia transform from a dying young woman to a vibrant advocate is one of the most rewarding aspects for Claire, because she not only saved a life, but helped unlock potential that might have been lost. Claire and Alexander's relationship evolves too, because somewhere between late-night lab sessions and fighting for the Foundation's values and supporting each other through crisis, they developed a genuine friendship. And there are moments when Claire realizes that she no longer sees him as an antagonist who wronged her, or even as an ally of convenience, but as someone she genuinely respects and cares about. And that realization is simultaneously comforting and unsettling, because feelings are messy, and she doesn't quite know how to process them. She's also aware that some people outside the Foundation speculate about their relationship, make assumptions that there's romantic involvement, and while that isn't true, the speculation bothers her because she worked so hard to be taken seriously professionally, to be seen as a legitimate scientist and CEO in her own right, not as someone who got the position through a personal connection with a wealthy benefactor. She considers addressing the rumors publicly, setting the record straight, but Patricia advises against it, saying that denying rumors often just amplifies them, that the best response is to continue doing excellent work and let the results speak. Meanwhile, the Foundation continues expanding. They establish partnerships with the WHO to bring the technology to developing countries. They create training programs for technicians in rural areas to use the algorithm. They sponsor clinical trials exploring even more applications, and the impact is becoming undeniable. Studies start showing a measurable decrease in late-stage cancer diagnoses in areas where the algorithm was implemented. Health economists calculate billions in healthcare savings from earlier treatment. Lives saved are numbering in the thousands and climbing. Claire receives awards, recognition from medical societies, from tech organizations, and even the Nobel Committee starts making noises about a potential prize. She's uncomfortable with the attention, deflecting credit to the team, to Alexander, to Sophia. But Patricia tells her that accepting recognition gracefully is part of the responsibility, because it raises the profile of the work and brings more attention to the mission. And then something happens that changes everything again. Sophia's cancer returns. Not the same type, but a different cancer entirely, triggered possibly by the treatments that saved her life. The cruel irony isn't lost on anyone, that the same treatments that gave her years of life might now be cutting those years short. Sophia takes the news with remarkable calm, because she has already faced death once, and she's not afraid. But she's sad because there's so much she still wants to do. Claire feels crushing guilt, even though rationally she knows that without her intervention, Sophia would already be dead years ago, that these extra years were a gift. But emotionally, she feels like she failed, and Alexander privately admits to Claire that he's terrified, that he's not sure if he can go through watching Sophia decline again. Claire promises that they'll fight, that they'll use every tool, every advancement that the algorithm can provide, but honestly, she doesn't know if it will be enough, because cancer is relentless, and sometimes there are no miracles. Sophia's second cancer diagnosis casts a shadow over everything Claire and the team have achieved, because if the technology they developed cannot save the one person who inspired its creation, then what does it all mean? Claire plunges into a frantic work mode, using the algorithm to analyze every aspect of Sophia's new cancer, looking for patterns, vulnerabilities, anything that could give them an advantage. Priya and Marcus join her, working 20-hour shifts, because Sophia has become more than just the founder's daughter. She is a friend, a colleague, someone they genuinely love. Claire discovers that this new cancer is particularly aggressive, a rare type of sarcoma that doesn't respond well to conventional treatments. But the algorithm identifies something interesting, a specific genetic mutation that suggests Sophia could respond to an experimental therapy being tested in a clinical trial in Switzerland. Dr. Torres initially hesitates because the therapy is still highly experimental, with a success rate of only 30% and severe side effects. But Sophia, without hesitation, says she wants to try, because 30% is better than zero, and she won't spend her remaining months doing nothing. The process to get Sophia into the trial is Kafkaesque. Mountains of paperwork, insurance denials because experimental treatment isn't covered, visa problems because the trial is in Zurich, and there's no equivalent in the United States. And Alexander is ready to simply pay out of his own pocket, millions if necessary, but even money cannot fast-track some regulatory process. Claire finds herself in a strange position, using her growing influence in the medical world, making calls to contacts at the FDA, on Swiss medical boards, in oncology networks, arguing Sophia's case, and she hates it. She hates feeling like she's asking for special favors because Sophia has connections and resources, while thousands of other patients in similar situations have no one making those calls for them. She expresses this to Sophia during one of their hospital conversations, and Sophia, with that brutal honesty that has become her trademark, says that Claire is absolutely right, that it is unfair, that Sophia has advantages others don't, but that using those advantages doesn't make the system more unjust. The system is already unjust, and it's better to use privilege to at least save one life while simultaneously fighting to change the system for everyone. This perspective helps Claire make peace with what she needs to do, and eventually, through a combination of persistence, money, and connections, Sophia is accepted into the trial in Zurich. Alexander decides to accompany her, leaving Patricia and Claire entirely in charge of the foundation temporarily. And before leaving, Alexander has a conversation with Claire in her office, and he looks older suddenly, the weight of everything showing in his features, and he says that regardless of what happens with Sophia, he wants Claire to know how much he admires her, not just her professional skills, but her courage to remain faithful to her principles, even when it cost her. And he admits that before meeting Claire, he saw integrity as a luxury that successful people couldn't afford, as naive idealism. But she proved that integrity is not weak. It is the purest form of strength. And then he says something Claire wasn't expecting. He says that if something happens to him, if he doesn't return from Zurich, he has already established in his will that a significant portion of his personal fortune goes to the foundation. But more importantly, he wants Claire to know that she has his authority to continue the work in the way she sees fit, without interference from the board, from shareholders, from any. And Claire wants to protest that he will return, that Sophia will be fine, but the words stick in her throat because they both know there are no guarantees. And then he hugs her briefly, awkward because they're not typically physically affectionate people, and he leaves for Switzerland. And Claire is left feeling untethered, because even though she is CSO, even though Patricia is CEO, Alexander was always a grounding presence, and without him there, she feels the full weight of responsibility. The next few weeks are agonizing, because Claire receives sporadic updates from Alexander, brief texts saying that the treatment is going as expected, that Sophia is tolerating it better than they feared, but also not sharing complete details. And Claire is trying to keep the foundation running, keep the team's spirits up, while internally she is terrified. And then she receives a call at 3 a.m, East Coast time, and she knows even before answering that it is the kind of news that changes. It's Alexander, and his voice is strange, tight with emotion, and he says Sophia is in a coma, that she had a severe reaction to the treatment, that doctors don't know if she will wake up, and if she does, they don't know the extent of the damage. Claire feels the world tilting, because this cannot be happening. Not after everything. Not when they were so close. And she immediately books a flight to Zurich, because she needs to be there, even if it's just to sit beside the hospital. When she arrives in Zurich and sees Alexander, he looks broken, completely hollow. And Sophia is in the ICU, surrounded by machines, tubes everywhere. Claire sits next to him in silence because there are no adequate words. The days blur together, Alexander and Claire taking turns sitting with Sophia, talking to her, reading to her, playing. Because doctors say that hearing is often the last sense to go, that she might be able to hear even unconsciously. And Claire tells Sophia stories about the foundation, about patients whose lives were saved by the technology, about how Sophia's advocacy work is making a difference, and she promises that they'll continue the work, promises that Sophia's impact will live on, no matter what happens. Then, on the 4th day, something miraculous happens. Sophia's eyes open, just briefly, just for seconds, but she looks directly at Alexander and whispers a word that sounds like "Dad" before fading back. Doctors say it's a good sign, that the brain is functioning, that there is hope. And over the next week, Sophia slowly, gradually returns to consciousness. Confused, fragile, but alive. And alive means possibility, means a chance, and recovery is long and painful. Sophia has to relearn some basic motor functions, has memory gaps, has moments of frustration and despair, but she's alive and Doctors eventually admit that they don't know if it was the treatment that worked or if it was something else. Random chance, the body's inexplicable resilience. But scans show that the tumor is shrinking again, that the body is responding. Claire flies back to Boston, leaving Alexander and Sophia in Zurich, because the foundation needs her, because the work continues. And she's exhausted, emotionally, physically, spiritually, but also profoundly grateful. When Patricia asks if she's okay, Claire honestly doesn't know how to answer, because she's not exactly okay, but she's not okay either. She's just existing in a strange space where relief and anxiety coexist, where every day is a gift, but also a reminder of fragility. And then she receives an email that changes her perspective. It's from a woman in rural Kenya whose daughter was diagnosed with early-stage cervical cancer, using the algorithm that the foundation provided to a local clinic. And because it was caught early, the daughter was treated successfully, and the mother is writing to say thank you, to say that Claire saved her daughter's life, gave their family a few. Claire reads the email 3 times, 4 times, and she realizes that this is why the whole struggle was worth it. Not for the awards or the recognition, but for these moments, for these lives, for knowing that the work she started in a tiny apartment with an impossible dream is now rippling out, touching people she will never meet in places she will never visit. And she thinks about the choice she made 18 months ago when she refused Alexander's check, when she chose principles over money, when she said yes to an impossible project, and she realizes that every choice since then, every struggle, every doubt, every moment of wanting to give up, led to this moment. And she wouldn't change anything, because some prices are worth paying, and some battles are worth fighting even when the outcome is uncertain, and some dreams are worth pursuing even when everyone says they're impossible. And for the first time in months, Claire allows herself to really breathe, to feel peace, not because everything is perfect, but because she is exactly where she is supposed to be, doing exactly what she is supposed to be doing. 6 months after the crisis in Zurich, Claire is standing on stage at the United Nations in Geneva, in front of delegates from 150 countries, to announce that the Morrison Grayson Foundation algorithm is now being implemented in a collaborative partnership with the World Health Organization to make early cancer detection available in every country, regardless of economics. Sophia is sitting in the front row, recovered, still dealing with the effects of treatment, but alive and vibrant. Next to her is Alexander, who stepped down as CEO of Grayson Industries to dedicate himself full-time to philanthropy, and beside him is a new person in Claire's life. James Chen, the oncologist who was part of the original team and with whom Claire developed a relationship that surprised both of them, because neither was looking for romance, both married to their work. But sometimes connection happens when you're not expecting it. Backstage before the presentation, Claire had a moment of reflection, thinking about the journey that brought her here. 2 years ago, she was unemployed, blacklisted, and desperate. And now she's addressing the United States, announcing a partnership that will literally save millions of lives. The trajectory is so improbable, so unlikely, that if someone had told her then, she never would have believed it. In the presentation, she doesn't just talk about the technology. She talks about choices, about the moment when she ripped up the $500,000 check because some things are more valuable than money, about learning that sometimes saying no to the wrong thing is the only way to say yes to the right thing. And she talks about Sophia, with permission, showing photos from before, during, and after treatment, showing data about how early detection changed everything for her and for thousands of others. And she's honest about the challenges, about the pharmaceutical companies that fought them, about the regulatory hurdles, about the embezzlement scandal, about the moments when she wanted to quit. And she explains that the point of sharing the struggles is not to gain sympathy, but to be realistic with others who might want to follow a similar path. Because choosing integrity, choosing to prioritize impact over profit, is not an easy path. It is the harder path, with more obstacles, more doubters, and more moments where you question it. But it is also the only path where you can look in the mirror and genuinely like the person looking back. The response to the presentation is overwhelming. A standing ovation from the delegates, immediate commitments for funding, for partnerships, for countries volunteering to be pilot programs. Claire is overwhelmed because this is the culmination of everything she fought for. But she also knows it's just the beginning, because implementation will take years. There are logistical challenges, training needs, and infrastructure requirements. And every challenge will require the same determination, the same willingness to fight that brought them here. After the presentation, there is a reception where Claire is swarmed by people wanting to talk, to partner, and she's gracious, but also exhausted, because she is still fundamentally an introvert who finds these large social gatherings. James eventually rescues her, guiding her to a quiet corner where they can breathe, and he says that she was magnificent, that the story she told will inspire countless others to make similar choices. Claire laughs, because she doesn't feel magnificent. She feels like an imposter who somehow stumbled into significance. But James seriously says that maybe that's exactly what makes her perfect for the role, because she never lost touch with struggling, never forgot what it's like to be powerless, never developed the arrogance that comes from always having resources. In the weeks after Geneva, the Foundation announces a new initiative. They're creating a fellowship program for young scientists from underrepresented backgrounds, giving them resources, mentorship, and the opportunity to develop their own healthcare innovations, with no strings attached, no expectation of profit, just pure support for innovation that serves humanity. Sophia volunteers to head the program because she wants to give others the opportunities that she has. And watching Sophia throw herself into the work with an energy that doctors said might never return is a profound joy for Claire. Because saving Sophia's life wasn't just about adding years, it was about preserving potential, preserving all the contributions that she'll make. The foundation continues growing, but Claire and Patricia are careful to maintain the original mission, fighting off pressure to commercialize, because they learned that the moment you start making exceptions, the moment you prioritize sustainability over principles, is the beginning of the. There are still. Claire's relationship with James hits rough patches, because both have demanding careers, and both have the trauma of past relationships that make vulnerable difficult. There are board members who still question this. There are funding challenges, because the open source model means constant funding. And Sophia has minor health scares that send everyone into panic mode before the tests come back clear. Because once you've almost lost someone, every symptom, every pain, becomes a potential catastrophe. But there's also joy. Profound. There is celebration when the algorithm hits the milestone of detecting cancer in the 1 millionth. There are tears when a patient writes to say that they're alive because of Claire's. There is the satisfaction of knowing that they fundamentally changed the landscape of medical technology. And there is a moment when Claire, Alexander, and Sophia are sitting in the foundation office late one evening after everyone else has left, and they're not working. Just Alexander says something that sticks with. He says that the biggest gift Claire gave him wasn't the algorithm or the foundation, or even saving Sophia's life. It was teaching him that there's a different way to measure success, that legacy isn't about how much wealth you accumulate or how many companies you build. It's about what you leave behind for others. It's about the lives you touch, the principles you uphold, the changes you make that ripple out beyond your life. And Sophia adds that Claire taught her that surviving isn't enough, that having a second chance in life means a responsibility to make it count, to use time wisely, to fight for the things that. And Claire feels emotion welling because she never saw herself as a teacher or an inspiration. She just made choices that seemed obvious, stood up for what seemed. But she realizes that sometimes that's exactly what inspiration is. Not grand gestures, but consistent choices to choose right over easy, to choose principle over profit, to choose impact over comfort. Years later, when Claire eventually writes a memoir about the experience, because Patricia convinces her that the story needs to be told to inspire the next generation, she struggles with how to end it, because the story doesn't have a neat conclusion. Life isn't a movie with a tidy resolution. Cancer research continues. Funding remains a perpetual challenge. There is always more work to be done, more lives to save. But eventually, she settles on the simple truth the journey taught her, that refusing the money, refusing the easy path, refusing to compromise core values wasn't a sacrifice. It was an investment in the kind of life that she actually wanted to live. It was choosing to become the person that she could respect. And she writes that the moment in the Mandarin Oriental, when she tore up the check, was the single most important decision of her life. Not because it led to success, but because it established a pattern of choosing authentically, of aligning actions with values, even when expensive, even when difficult. And she ends the memoir with a challenge to readers, asking not to necessarily make the same choices she made, but to identify their own non-negotiable, to know what they stand for, and to have the courage to stand for it even when everyone says you're being impractical, naive, or idealistic, because the world changes not through grand revolutions, but through the accumulated choices of individuals who decide that some things matter more than convenience or comfort. And the book becomes an unexpected bestseller, not because it's perfectly written, but because the message resonates, because in a world where compromise seems inevitable, where selling out seems pragmatic, there is still a hunger for stories of people who didn't, who chose the harder path and chose it anyway because it was. Claire, in her 50s now, still working at the foundation, still developing new innovations, still fighting the same fights against commercialization, against the profit over people mentality, reads reviews of her book, and sees that somehow her story, the small story of one engineer who said no, has become part of a larger conversation about values, about integrity, about what kind of world we want. And she thinks about the 19-year-old version of herself starting college, already carrying students, wondering if all the sacrifice to get an education would be worth it. And she wishes she could tell that girl that yes, it will be hard. Yes, you'll make mistakes. Yes, you'll face moments where you question everything. But also, yes, it is absolutely worth it. Every moment of struggle will lead to a life of meaning, to work that matters, to impact that. And the real final moment that brings everything full circle happens when Claire is visiting a hospital in Boston, where a young girl of 12 is being treated for leukemia, detected early because of the. The girl's mother embraces Claire, tears streaming, saying that doctors said if the cancer had been found even a few months later, it might have been too late. But because it was caught early, the daughter has a 95% chance of full recovery. And the little girl, shy but curious, asks Claire what made her decide to become a scientist. And Claire thinks about all the complexity of the journey, all the struggles and victories. But she gives a simple answer. She says because she wanted to solve problems, to make things better, to help people. And sometimes the simplest truths are the most. And she tells the little girl that if she wants to make a difference in the world, she just has to choose it, have the courage to pursue it, and never let anyone tell her that caring about others is a weakness. Because choosing to help, choosing to fight for what's right, is the greatest strength anyone can have. And when Claire leaves the hospital and walks out onto the Boston streets, she feels a profound sense of not because the journey is over, but because she finally fully understands that refusing Alexander's money years ago wasn't the end. Something. It was the beginning. And choosing principle over payment, choosing integrity over income, choosing impact over ease was the best investment she ever made, because it bought her something money never. A life worth living, work worth doing, and a legacy worth. And as the story closes with Claire heading back to the foundation office where the team is waiting, where new challenges await, where the next chapter of the mission is beginning, she's smiling, because she knows regardless of what comes next, she made the right. She became the person she wanted to be, and sometimes that's all any of us can hope. And now we come to the end of this incredible journey of choice, courage, and transformation, and we want to hear your. Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Tell us which moment touched your heart the most, if you would have made the same choice Claire made in refusing the money and accepting the impossible, and if you also believe that some things are more important than money or financial security. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because we have many more inspiring stories coming. Stories about real people who made extraordinary choices that changed not only their own lives, but the world around. Thank you for being here with us, for investing your time in this story. And remember, wherever you are on your own journey, whatever pains you carry, There is always hope. There is always the possibility of starting. There is always a choice between letting the past destroy us or using it as a foundation to build something. Until the next, keep choosing what is right, even when it is difficult, because that is how we change the world, one courageous choice at a time.